Someone you love just died. They're lying on the ground in front of you, still warm. And what you're about to do next is something no other animal on Earth would ever do. Every instinct that kept your species alive for 2 million years is telling you to walk away. The body is meat now. In a hungry world, it's calories you can't afford to guard, a beacon for predators, a thing that will rot and make you sick. The deer steps over its dead. The herd moves on. Walking away is the intelligent choice. It's the sane one. You're not going to make it. Instead, you kneel. You claw a pit into cold, hard ground with a stick, and your bare hands burning energy you can't spare. You lay the body inside, and then you cover it. Not in dirt, but in flowers. Yarrow, cornflower, grape hyacinth. At least 8 different kinds, picked from the spring hills and spread across the dead. This was 60,000 years ago in the mountains of northern Iraq, and the hands that placed those flowers were not human. Not the way yours are. They belonged to a Neanderthal, a different species, the kind of creature we were taught was a brute who grunted through a short and violent life and felt almost nothing. One of them buried another under a blanket of wildflowers. Or, so the story goes. Because we have been arguing about that grave ever since. And that argument runs somewhere strange. It runs back to a pit of bones older than our entire species. It runs to a creature with a brain a third the size of yours, dragging its dead deep into a cave with no light at all. And it ends at a single grave holding a fortune so enormous that no living person in that world could ever have afforded it. Because the real question was never how ancient humans buried their dead. It is why they did it at all. Hold on to that. We are going to get there. By now you can feel why walking away is the smart move. The dead give you nothing back, no food, no shelter, no children, and yet everywhere we dig, ancient humans didn't. The easy explanation is that we buried the dead to stay clean. A rotting body breeds disease. It pulls wolves and hyenas straight to your camp. Put it in the ground, and the problem disappears. And that is real. It is part of it. But it collapses the moment you look at what people actually did. Because you do not need flowers to smother a smell. You do not need to carry a body for miles to keep it away from where you sleep. You certainly do not need to climb down into the dark and sit with it. Hygiene explains a hole in the ground. It cannot explain a single thing that comes next. The oldest clue sits in a cave in northern Spain, at a place called Atapuerca. Deep inside, past a crawl space and a maze of passages, the floor suddenly opens into a vertical shaft that drops 13 meters straight down into blackness. The people who found it called it the Cima de los Huesos, the pit of bones. Stand at the lip of it, look down, and you would see nothing but black. At the bottom, archaeologists have recovered the remains of at least 28 individuals. They are around 430,000 years old, far older than our species, older than the Neanderthals, an early human called Homo heidelbergensis. And there is no way all 28 of them fell in by accident. No predator hoarded them down there. Somebody carried their dead to the mouth of that shaft and let them fall into the earth, one after another across generations. And among that tangle of bones resting with them was a single object, a hand axe, shaped from beautiful reddish quartzite, unlike any other tool at the entire site. They named it Excalibur. Turn it over in your mind. It shows almost no wear. It was never really used. It looks, for all the world, like a gift. 400,000 years ago, someone may have laid a beautiful thing beside their dead and left it there forever. Which brings us back to those flowers. The Shanidar cave burials were excavated by an archaeologist named Ralph Solecki in the 1960s. When his team studied the soil packed around one of the skeletons, they found dense clusters of ancient pollen, from flowers that bloom in the spring. The image was impossible to resist. A Neanderthal, grieved over, laid to rest on a bed of blossoms. It rewrote how the entire world saw them, overnight. And then other scientists asked a colder question. What if it was never grief? What if a small burrowing rodent, a gerbil-like animal that stuffs flowers and seeds into its den, had simply tunneled through that grave and left the pollen behind? For years, that one doubt hung over the flower burial like a shadow. We may genuinely never know if those flowers were placed by a mourner or a mouse, but here's what the doubters could never explain away. Nobody washed those bodies into the cave. The Neanderthals of Shanidar came back to the same place over and over and laid their dead in the same ground. Only a few years ago, a new team reopened that cave and uncovered yet another one of them, an articulated skeleton deliberately set into the rock. Maybe it was never flowers, but it was a place they returned to for their dead. And returning to your dead is already something an animal is not supposed to do. And this is where it gets genuinely strange. In South Africa, there is a cave system called Rising Star. To reach its deepest chamber, you have to lower yourself through a crack in the rock about 18 centimeters wide, the length of a pencil, in total darkness, with the stone pressing against your chest. And down in that nearly unreachable black room, a team led by the paleoanthropologist Lee Berger found the bones of a creature called Homo naledi. It stood upright. It had hands almost like yours. And it had a brain about a third the size of the one you are using right now, barely bigger than a chimpanzee's. By everything we assumed, this thing should not have been capable of an idea. And yet its bones are heaped in a chamber that no flood reached and no predator could enter. The only way they got there is if other Naledi carried them through the dark, through that crushing gap in the rock, on purpose. If Berger is right, and plenty of serious scientists are not convinced, then a creature that was barely human at all was carrying its dead into the earth 250,000 years before you were born. The belief that you need a big brain to grieve might be the most human arrogance we have. And when our own species finally starts leaving graves, we do not simply match the others, we go completely, recklessly overboard. In a cave in Israel, a child who died around 100,000 years ago was buried with the antlers of a red deer laid carefully across the chest, the small arms folded around them. Not tools, not food. Antlers. Something that must have meant something we can no longer read. But the grave that truly breaks your sense of scale is a site in Russia called Sungir. 34,000 years ago, 2 children were buried there, laid down head to head, and their bodies were covered from skull to foot in more than 10,000 beads, each one carved by hand from mammoth ivory. When modern people sat down and tried to recreate those beads with the tools of the time, each single bead took roughly 1 hour to make. So do that arithmetic against your own life. 10,000 hours is around 5 years of full-time work, and every last bit of it was carved into tiny beads, one at a time, then buried in the cold ground on the bodies of 2 children, to never be seen by anyone again. Beside them lay spears made from mammoth tusks that had somehow been straightened perfectly straight, something we still cannot fully explain how they managed. In a world where every calorie was a fight to see the morning, an entire community spent a fortune it could not afford, and gave every last bit of it to the dead. And over on every continent our species reached, they did one more thing. They painted the dead red. They ground ochre, a rusty red earth the color of blood, the same red moving through you right now, and they poured it over the bodies. In Wales, a young man buried more than 30,000 years ago was so soaked in it that for a century people wrongly called him the Red Lady. The same red on skin already gone cold, chosen by people who never met, who could never have taught it to one another, as though the whole scattered species arrived separately, at the same quiet instinct. Give the dead back the color of being alive. None of this is unique to us. Not really. Elephants stop at the bones of their dead and turn them over gently with their trunks and return to the spot for years. A chimpanzee mother whose infant dies will carry the body for days, sometimes weeks, unable to set it down. The root of this is old, and it is not ours alone. We just took it further than anything else that has ever lived. So go back to the question. Not how. Why? Why would a starving species spend flowers and antlers and 10,000 hours of work and the color of its own blood on people who could no longer feel a single part of it? Because at some point, one of us looked at a body that used to be a person and could not accept that the person was simply gone. A grave is the first hard proof of an idea that has no bones and leaves no tool behind. The idea that a human being is more than the meat they are made of, that something in them is still owed something, that death might be a door instead of a wall. The moment a creature carries flowers into the dark for someone who will never see them, it is telling you it believes in something it cannot prove. That is where religion begins. That is where us begins. Not with a weapon and not with a fire. With a grave. We will never fully know what was inside their heads. Maybe part of it really was the smell. Maybe the pollen really was a mouse. We are trying to read the minds of people 40,000 generations dead, from the things they pressed into the dirt. But the pattern is too heavy to mean nothing. The returning, the labor, the red. You do not spend a fortune you do not have on a thing you do not believe. You do not. So, what did ancient humans do with their dead? The same thing you will do. One day you will stand over a grave, or someone will stand over yours. And whoever is left will feel the pull to mark the place, to bring something that grows, to come back on a certain day and stand there and say a name out loud to no one who can answer. You will think that grief is your own, private, and modern, and new. It is none of those things. That pull is older than your language, older than your country, older than your species. It was already ancient when we were brand new. For 400,000 years, every kind of human that has ever walked the earth has stood at the edge of a grave and quietly refused to let go. We still have not learned how to stop. And somewhere, 60,000 years ago in the dark of a cave, someone gathered flowers for a body that would never see them and started something we have never once put down.